Welcome in to this week's episode of Three True Values. We are bringing you all things college basketball on a Thursday. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we have plenty to get into. Today is a NCAA tournament bubble extravaganza. That's what we're going to call it here. We are going to break down all the teams that are on the NCAA tournament bubble. We're going to tell you if they can still make the NCAA tournament, what they need to do if they're still in the mix to make it into the field, where they stand today, how all of it intersects. We're going to break it all down for you and hopefully give you an idea heading into this weekend what's going to happen when the selection committee announces the 68 teams in the NCAA tournament field as we kick off March Madness. Just 1 week from today will be the loaded slate where a full 16 games across the day, starting in the morning through the late night. And then, of course, we'll get to do it again Friday. Two of the best days in the sporting calendar. We're just a week away from it, but first we have to set the field. And that's what conference tournaments help us do. We are through the regular season, of course, and now the final data points are being laid down. We're getting a last glimpse at these teams and trying to determine which ones are the most worthy of a spot in the NCAA tournament. And that's why in this first segment, we're not going to go super long, but I do just want to talk about the bubble as a whole. In the second segment, we're going to break down each team as promised. In this first segment, though, I just want to talk about the general idea of a weak bubble, a strong bubble, a soft bubble, the way that we talk about these things. It is true that the very bottom of this bubble is not particularly strong. And by that, what I mean is, I don't feel like when we come Selection Sunday that we are going to have the conversation a deserving team was left out. I don't think that we are going to have the debate about a strong team that we view as an NCAA tournament caliber group being left out. There's no team that we think can make it beyond one or two rounds that's not going to be playing within the field. And so I think that that's a good thing that we're not leaving teams out that are deserving. Now, on the flip side, if we debate this, is it a weak bubble? Well, that would mean that we're allowing teams into the field that don't deserve to be there. And that's been a large conversation about some of these teams that are in the mix. Do they deserve it? Is going below 500 in your conference enough? Is just above 500 for the season a good enough mark that you should be playing in the NCAA tournament? What, something that is supposed to be a prestigious event? Have you shown enough that we should trust you that you can provide us with compelling, interesting basketball on the biggest stage? And I do think that it is a slightly weak bubble for that reason. I do feel like as we come down to these final days, the chances that we have a team in the field that at least the general public does not believe earned their spot continues to grow. Now, there's still a chance that doesn't happen. It will all come down to how these teams perform down the final stretch in these last couple of days. Can they string together a couple of big wins against top teams? Because that would kind of sway things. It would start to convince you that maybe they are actually worthy. Maybe they are a team that can do something come the NCAA tournament. And so as we look back and forth, I don't think we fully understand yet if this is going to be strong, weak, whatever the case is. Well, I do think we're at a point where we're not going to have a strong team left out. So we're not going to be at a position where it's super strong. But I also don't think we're at a position where it's super weak. I think we have viable candidates in the mix here. It just so happens that one of them has become a very public talking point in Auburn. Yes, the overall record is not great. Unfortunately, for those who want to pick that apart, the analytics still say that they're firmly in this bubble conversation. They have more quad one results than the teams around them. And that's hard to get around when that's the criteria that we have set forward. When we look at the analytics, when we look at the resume, yes, the record matters at some point, but there's got to be other teams that provide a more compelling case. And to that point, there's not that team just glaringly on the wrong side of things that shouldn't be right now. Now, could a New Mexico get into that conversation? Could a San Diego State get in that conversation? Sure. Could we get a bid thief and make this all a different conversation? Because that's the path towards this being a strong bubble. Bid stealers coming from whether it's the Mountain West, the A10. It could even come from somewhere else. The MAC is one of the best chances because Miami, Ohio is going to be in the field somewhere. Because if you knock it down one spot, I think that SMU is a team that, yes, probably at least in the overall body of work, deserves a spot in the NCAA tournament. We'll get into more of that in the second segment. But that's kind of a breakdown of where we stand, what it means when we talk about a strong bubble, a weak bubble, and we start to have these ongoing debates about where college basketball is and try to base it off of really the second or third tier of teams. It's an interesting conversation. How much does it really impact the overall tournament? That's for other people to kind of break down and think about in their own way. On the other side, we're going to do an in-depth breakdown here. We're going to cut this first segment short so that we can give you an extended second segment here, break down all the bubble teams that you need to know heading into this weekend right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in. We are breaking down the NCAA tournament bubble just days ahead of Selection Sunday here, and we've got a lot to get to. Here in this second segment, we're going to give you an in-depth breakdown. We're going to talk about where everyone stands at this point, what they need to do here in the coming days. We're going to start with the teams that are in the last 4 bye positions, and these can shift. These will continue to shift over the coming days, based on the results of these teams and the teams around them in the bracket. But right now, the last 4 that are in the field without having to travel to Dayton to start their NCAA tournament, those would be Santa Clara, of course, the runner-up in the West Coast Conference. Their resume is complete. I think that they have clearly done enough to create a 3-bid league there. Gonzaga, the conference champion, which of course already would have gotten an an at-large bid into the field. St. Mary's, which finished second in the regular season, and Santa Clara, I do believe, has done enough to get themselves in on the 10 seed line. NC State is the next team up in this conversation. Got off of a little losing skid. I think that they've really solidified themselves. They were firmly in the field, started to fall the wrong direction, as we've seen a couple of these teams that we're going to discuss do. But I think that win in the conference tournament kind of steadied the ship, got them on a little bit more even footing. I think even with a loss against Virginia, if they take one in today's slate, I think that they're safely in the field. Don't think they have to worry about falling. Potentially, I mean, it would take a real kind of maneuvering of results. They could fall into the last 4 in, but I think that they're pretty safely in the field and not likely to drop into that last 4 in. UCF is next up, another team that was on a skid, got things at least steady enough in the conference tournament. They picked up a win against the Cincinnati team that was also on the bubble, kind of eliminated a team from contention. We'll talk about that in just a second, but also extended their run. Although they will face Arizona today, they're not likely to win that one. If they do take a loss, though, again, I don't think that they're at any risk of falling out of the field. Particularly against Arizona, what's going to be interesting is, does it even hurt them? Now, I don't think they can go out and take a 20, 25-point loss. If that happens, their metrics will get dinged, certainly, and they could fall into that last 4 in. But a loss against Arizona, really, we've seen any of those top 3 teams. You lose to Duke, you lose to Michigan, you lose to Arizona. you don't really get knocked in the metrics too much because you were expected to lose that one. So it creates an interesting kind of dilemma here. We'll find out. Do they fall at all as a result of a loss against Arizona, if that is to happen? Of course, if they beat Arizona, they will be firmly locked in the field, probably surpass this, could be back in the mix for a 9 seed as we get closer to Selection Sunday. Of course, would also depend on how things go over those final days in that Big 12 tournament. Can they pick up more wins? Do they go on to be the conference champion? What would happen there? Do want to take a pause in our last 4 buys here because Miami, Ohio currently slots in at this position. Now, they are still projected as the MAC champion. So they currently sit on the 11 seed line above where the bubble is, not below. That's important in terms of where they would stack if they did lose in their conference tournament. But right now, safely in the field, yes, they can afford a loss and still make it. That might come in the last 4 in. I would assume they're not going to be in the last 4 in. I would say that that's probably the safest bet. I don't think that they drop into the last 4 in. I think that the committee will rank them high enough that they don't have to go through that pathway if they do lose in the conference tournament. If they win in the conference tournament, they could continue to shuffle up just a little bit here. They'd put a few more wins on their resume. As we know, the undefeated run, it would reach 34 games at that point. That would be worthy of kind of slotting them up at least in the 10 seed range, I think, at that point. But we go back into the last 4 buys. The final team in that mix is Texas, which is just hanging on, staying above that last 4 in. They, of course, took a loss in the SEC tournament. So their resume is complete. They are at real risk of falling into that last 4 in, particularly with Missouri in action today. VCU will be in action on Friday. Auburn still in action at this point. I think that they're at real risk of dropping into that last 4 in. If Missouri picks up a win, they certainly will. And of course, their resume is complete. That brings us to the last 4 in, and Missouri. We kind of just talked about them there for a second, but I do think that Missouri can rise back above this last 4 in. They, of course, went on a little skid there, dropped some games that would have locked them into the NCAA tournament field. I think that they're still pretty firmly in. I don't see many pathways outside of multiple bid stealers that they would get themselves in danger of missing the NCAA tournament, but I do think that they are at risk of this last 4 in. If they lose today's game, they will almost certainly end up in that conversation and would really have to sweat it out because, again, their metrics don't line up across the board above some of these other bubble teams. You would really put yourselves at the hand of the committee and hope that they see things the same way that bracketologists do, that Missouri is still the better option over some of the other candidates. VCU is next up, and they're interesting because they don't play until Friday in the A10 tournament. Now, I do think that they probably need to win at least 1 game to get themselves into this NCAA tournament field. They could definitely drop with an early upset because it would be a bad loss on their resume if they were to lose to one of the lower ranked teams in that conference. But if they're able to make it, I think, to the conference tournament championship game, face off against St. Louis, I do think they can create enough cushion here that, barring bid stealers, barring a super deep run by the teams below them that are still in play, which is only a handful. There's only 5 teams below them in this entire conversation who still even have games on the schedule. Really 4 of them that have any kind of potential to pass them. So I think that getting to the conference championship would make VCU feel good. Not good enough, though. They would really be sweating it out. I think that their best path into the tournament is still at this point to win the conference championship in the A10. We move now to SMU, a team that was on a bad skid in the regular season. They hit the ACC tournament, and they end up getting 1 win and 1 loss. They drop a game to Louisville. Not going to ding you too hard for a loss to Louisville. Louisville is firmly in the field. They're currently on the 5 seed of bracketology. So it won't set you back, but it also won't propel you forward, something that SMU really needed. With a win against Louisville, they could have counted themselves among those teams that were in the field, but hoping not to drop, hoping that bid stealers don't really wreck things and make it a hot debate. But SMU is also one of the most interesting teams in college basketball to break down right now. They're dealing with an injury to BJ Edwards, which has undoubtedly changed the way that they play. They have looked like a worse team. They have gone on a losing skid since he exited the lineup. He is still currently projected to be back for the NCAA tournament. Now, if more news came out that he would not be available for the first weekend, I think that changes everything. Because right now, what the selection committee has to do is weigh the resume with BJ Edwards and the resume without BJ Edwards. And if that's the case, and he's expected to return somewhere close to 100%, because if you think that he's going to come back at 50%, you have a different conversation. But if you think he's going to come back and be mostly healthy for the first weekend of the NCAA tournament, I think that weighs heavily in SMU's favor to get one of these last spots, regardless of where the cutoff point ends up. Because yes, the resume has slid into this range after his injury. But before his injury, they looked like a team that was going to safely land in the field, like a team that was going to establish itself in this NCAA tournament bracket. Maybe a 10 seed, maybe even up to a 9 seed. But that hasn't been the case down the stretch without him. So how heavily do they weigh the BJ Edwards injury? That is the most interesting thing in the entire bracket right now to me. I think it's going to be really telling what they do with SMU as we get down to the final seeds in this NCAA tournament. I could see a situation. I do think that SMU has the most variance in the field right now, because I can see a situation where they say, look, they dropped a bunch of games, but it was all without BJ Edwards and he's going to play. So let's evaluate them, how they played before. This is a team that could be anywhere from missing the field all the way up to a 9-10 seed conversation. It swings that far based on what has dropped off in recent weeks without him. So watch out for where SMU lands in the field. If they are higher than you expect, that means that the committee has really taken into account that BJ Edwards injury and is not dinging them for these recent results. Auburn comes in as the last team in the field right now as we stand entering the Thursday slate. Auburn will continue to play. So SMU is done. Missouri and VCU still playing. Texas is done just above that. Auburn still in action. Today's game will be massive for them. Yesterday, to escape against Mississippi State, pull away at the end of that game, be able to manage that margin, I thought was huge for the Tigers. They had to get that result. If they lost in that game, they would have missed the NCAA tournament. I don't think there's really any question about it. But the job is not done, because Auburn will face Tennessee today, a game that they are not going to be favored to win. And so for Auburn, if you can go out and get an upset win over Tennessee, that adds to the quad one portion of your resume. It gets you further away from a 500 record overall. It takes you deeper into the SEC tournament. It could have you playing deeper than many of these teams around you by the time it's all said and done. More data points on your resume. And if you're Auburn, that's important, because your resume is what people are trying to ding. The analytics look solid. They're in this realm where you're supposed to be. So for Auburn to get the job done, I think they probably need to win this game against Tennessee. And here's why. Because now we're going to talk about the first 4 out. And New Mexico tops that group. New Mexico plays San Jose State tonight. That'll be their first game in the Mountain West tournament. And so I think that it is key for Auburn to win, because New Mexico, barring a shocking outcome, is going to keep playing into Friday. New Mexico, of course, newly into their conference tournament, if they can then win their second round game, would continue to build up their resume. A team with significantly less losses than Auburn, a team that can continue to build up its analytic profile to catch and surpass Auburn. I do think that the deeper New Mexico goes into the tournament, the harder it would be for Auburn to hold on if they don't win against Tennessee here. So for New Mexico, big opportunity ahead. You don't necessarily have to win the Mountain West to get in. You've just got to make it deep enough to surpass Auburn in the seeding here. But there's a caveat there. The other thing you have to do is make it deeper than San Diego State, because San Diego State is next up on this line. Now, I do think there is a little bit of a gap from New Mexico to San Diego State when we talk about where they stand right now in terms of their resume. However, the conference tournament is one of the great equalizers. New Mexico, if they took an earlier exit from this conference tournament, would have less data points. San Diego State would have a chance to catch them in that sense. San Diego State would have more of an argument saying we made it deeper in the conference tournament than that team. How can you seed them above us? That's a compelling case. And so for San Diego State, it's all about making the deepest run possible. I don't think that they will feel safe on Selection Sunday unless they are able to win the conference tournament. That would then create a bid stealer situation and really mess with the Auburn versus New Mexico debate, regardless of where you think San Diego State ranks among them. It would push the bubble down one position, with Utah State already firmly in the field from the Mountain West, and currently as the one seed in that conference tournament, who we are projecting to get that final or that automatic bid from the conference. So I think that New Mexico and San Diego State, if we were to set the odds here, does Auburn make it or does New Mexico make it? Does San Diego State make it? I think that New Mexico probably has the best chance, followed by Auburn, followed by San Diego State. But I think that the most likely is that one of the Mountain West teams makes it into the field. Auburn, though, with a win today, completely flips that, and I think they become favored to get one of those spots, barring a conference championship by one of the two below them. We talk next about Indiana, who is in this first four out conversation. Their resume is complete. They lose to Northwestern, just a crushing loss in the conference tournament yesterday. It really is going to ding them. I'm afraid that it is going to be the final blow for this Indiana team, that they're going to be left out of the NCAA tournament. Now, they are going to be an interesting one all the way through Selection Sunday, however, because the resume is close enough. They're in a big enough conference that if it came down to an early loss by New Mexico, an early loss by San Diego State, say Auburn goes out now, well, the resumes are close enough between Auburn and Indiana. And if we're ruling out saying that New Mexico and San Diego State would be taking worse losses, so they move down the pecking order a little bit. I think that there's a scenario where it just goes head to head and the committee's debating Auburn, Indiana, who do we like better? And they just like Indiana a little bit better. I think that's definitely an opportunity. But I don't think that it's among the most likely at all. I think that it relies on a lot to go their way. So I do think that Indiana is likely out of the NCAA tournament based on that loss to Northwestern. We round out this first four out with Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech is a team that is also done with its conference tournament run, a team that looked like they could surge up into one of those final spots, but then took a loss against Wake Forest, one that really is going to ding them more than you would like. I think that it pretty much eliminated them. Their resume is not better than Indiana's. We just talked about where Indiana finds themselves. And so they're now going to sit on the outside looking in. They're going to be one of the first teams out of the field, but that's not going to give them a whole lot of solace knowing that they didn't make it into the NCAA tournament this season. We now kind of wrap things up. We're going to talk about the next four out, and we'll throw out some names of teams that are further out on the peripheral. But we're going to start this conversation with Oklahoma because Oklahoma is the team that just keeps making things interesting. They just won't let the story die. They won't let things kind of simmer down. Oklahoma is one of the only teams on this bubble. We've just spoken about so many teams that were struggling, that were on losing streaks, that were hurting their position in the bracket, that have not helped themselves at the very least in recent weeks. Oklahoma is maybe the first one since the last four buys to be in this category as a hot team that is continuing to string together wins. And so now facing Texas A&M today, they have a chance to vault themselves above the Virginia Techs, above the Indianas, because at the very least, they're a team that's still playing. They're a team that's still adding to their resume. And so at the worst, you're talking about them as one of the few teams that has a path forward into the NCAA tournament, that has the ability to continue building their resume and get into the conversation where they need to be. Are they going to go deeper in the SEC tournament than Auburn? Are they going to pick up more quad one wins along the way? Can they balance out the more games you add? That means the further away from 500 you're going to be overall. Can they get these things going in their way to get up there and jump a San Diego State, jump a New Mexico, and go head to head in a debate against Auburn? What does that then look like? Oklahoma is not dead. They've got a game here against Texas A&M that they have to win. If they win that, they then put themselves in a great position to pick up a huge win in this SEC tournament. If they can do that, I then think they become one of the most interesting bubble teams in the entire conversation. I think that they put themselves firmly in the mix if they head into the weekend of the SEC tournament to land a spot by the time we reach Selection Sunday and the selection show, which will reveal the final teams in. Because, again, this is all about getting the best teams in. The selection committee chair said as much on Wednesday. They don't look at the most deserving teams. They're trying to create the best NCAA tournament bracket, get the best teams. Now, how you view that is subjective, yes. But it's undeniable that if a team is on a big winning streak and everyone else around them is on a losing streak, that team becomes more desirable. You feel like, at the very least, whether it's true or not, that team has a better chance of making a deep run, a better chance of making you look good than any of the teams around them. So that's where Oklahoma finds itself, and they are the team that could continue to catapult themselves up day after day if they can keep picking up wins in this SEC tournament. Below them, we find Cincinnati. Cincinnati, another interesting one to break down here because they were kind of that hot team at the end of the regular season. But then they take a couple of losses. They're knocked out of the Big 12 tournament by UCF, who kind of solidified their spot by doing that. And I think that it just dings Cincinnati enough that they're going to land below Indiana. They're going to land below Virginia Tech. The analytics were never incredible for them. They were on the right side of things, but the resume metrics just did not have them in the right realm at all. Wins above bubble was way too low, and they needed to improve that during the conference tournament. They needed some big results to flip those numbers and get them up at least 10 spots in that metric if they were going to be on the right side of the bubble. That didn't happen. They end up taking another loss, drops them a little bit. And so now here they find themselves in that next four out. Seton Hall. Now, this is the last team that's still alive, that's still building on its resume. They play in the Big East tournament starting on Thursday here today. They will have Creighton on the schedule. Creighton, a team that has really struggled, has not been as good as advertised this season, but still lively, still could pull off an upset here. Seton Hall is an interesting one in that their resume just doesn't stand out. They're just kind of flying under the radar. And because of that, I think as much as anything, they're on the wrong side of things because Oklahoma is the hot team if you want to go there. Auburn is the team with the best resume on paper. Indiana, if you want to argue against Auburn, would be the team that you choose. New Mexico or San Diego State is the kind of wild card out of the slightly smaller conference, the Mountain West. So that just pushes Seton Hall so far down the pecking order. I think it would take a run all the way to the conference championship game to even get themselves into this mix because there's just not a lot of great wins out there in the Big East this year. It's really St. John's and UConn. Those are the two big wins. A win against Villanova, yes, would be important, but I think that they would need to beat at least St. John's, get into that conference championship game, and make it competitive against UConn to really make the committee think long and hard about them as one of the final teams in this NCAA tournament field. The last team that's in the next four out would be Stanford. Stanford, a team that had the quad one wins, but just didn't have anything else that you look for. Too many losses, low in the quadrant system, too many losses overall. The computer numbers just didn't fully add up around it. It just didn't quite make it to the threshold that you need to land on the right side of things. They were an interesting team coming into the week, though, because, of course, they had those couple of categories, those couple of boxes checked that they needed to. And so it was kind of interesting to see, can they check the other ones? Can they just make it so good on one side of the argument that you have to put them in the conversation? They weren't able to stretch that out, weren't able to get the job done. So they will land on the wrong side of things. California in a similar boat, a little bit different of a resume makeup there, but just not going to do enough. They're out of the ACC tournament, and so can't do anything to improve their stock now. South Florida, another one that's just too far on the wrong side of things because they're either going to get an automatic bid or they're going to lose in their conference tournament. That loss would be too damaging to keep them in the mix for one of those last spots in the field. So this has been a complete bubble breakdown. We've gone through all of the teams that you need to know about heading into Selection Sunday, the teams that could be in, the teams that could be out, what they need to do. I hope that it's been informative. If you have any more questions, please hit me up at JDFletch3 on Twitter. I will be posting fresh bracketology throughout the weekend. We have live updates going on after key results. We also have an automatic bid tracker, bracketology insights column, all of that through the weekend, all the way up until the selection show begins and we reveal the bracket. Of course, Sunday night, I will be doing a breakdown show, kind of going through what we saw, what they got right, what they got wrong, what the bracket sets up as now. And then our Tuesday show will return with some bracket picks. We'll go through the top players in the bracket, who you need to be watching. And then our regular Thursday show will come out, really just breaking down what happened in the first four and also what we need to be looking for in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Right here on Three True Values, I'm your host, James Fletcher. Thanks for tuning in.